It's lovely to see many of you. There's over more than one screen on mine, so and it's great to be with you. I haven't been able to come along to the other sessions, so I'm sort of jumping in at the deep end. So I hope this is similar to what you've experienced previously. I should say as well that my camera for some reason turns black purple, so don't be too put off by my clerical shirt looking Episcopal. The Church of England really isn't that crazy, don't worry. Yeah, I'll sort of introduce myself in a moment, but also want to find, if I can, Pouya, yes, on my screen, who is there, and Rabbi Aaron, who, Aaron, could you unmute yourself and speak, and then you'll move up on my screen so I can see you.
Not a problem. Problem is, Chan's probably going to get me to stop speaking.
Yeah, that's enough. Thank you very much. So tonight the intention is for Aaron and I to have a conversation, and then a little later on I'll hand over to Pouya. But we'll begin by introducing ourselves in our own words. So, as Corenza has said, my name is Gavin Wort. As you can guess, I'm an Anglican priest. I'm the coordinating chaplain and chaplain of the Hill Colleges at Durham University. I'm a Durham Diocesan Interfaith advisor, and I hold that role alongside Chris Howson. There are two of us as diocesan interfaith advisors in this diocese. I'm vice chair of the Newcastle Council of Faiths, and Aaron is my chairman, as I'm sure he'll say in a bit. I'm a trustee of the County Durham Faiths Network. I can sort of list off various jobs because I'm not very good at moving quickly. But I'll just say previously I was vicar and university chaplain in Newcastle Diocese, and I was in the Diocese of Newcastle for quite some years and chaired the Newcastle Diocese Committee for Interfaith and Ethnic Relations, CIFA, it's a bit of a mouthful. I chaired that for about 10 years. So those are a few things by way of introduction for myself. Can I hand over to Aaron to introduce yourself, please?
Hello, everyone, and my name is Aaron Lipsey. I'm the Rabbi of the Newcastle Hebrew congregation and have responsibility for the outlying very small Jewish communities in the northeast as well. I'm, as Gavin mentioned, the chair of the Newcastle Council of Faiths. I'm prison chaplain, student chaplain, and university chaplain as well, so tends to keep me occupied. I've worked with Gavin almost since I arrived here about 10 years ago, and I find it to be one of the most rewarding aspects of my job, and I'm very grateful for his friendship and guidance, and very happy to be here tonight, and especially if he's going to keep me on a leash.
Thanks, Aaron. And Pouya, would you like to introduce yourself at this point, please?
Hi, my name is Pouya Heidari, and I'm a curate at St. Gabriel, Sunderland, and I'm really looking forward to tonight. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So I think, as I've mentioned, the first part of tonight's session is going to take the form of a conversation between Aaron and I. And in my own mind, I sort of titled it as Perspectives on Anti-Semitism, or A Priest and a Rabbi Walk into a Zoom Call. That we do tend to go into coffee shops and restaurants together when things allow. So this is just another place to walk into tonight. We're going to break up the session into a few parts, and my intention is to pause between each for questions and comment, so long as time allows. We'll just see how we get on. So the first part, I'm going to hand over to Aaron to share some questions with you. I like to call this, am I an anti-Semite? Over to you, Aaron.
Thank you. I think, Gavin, you've heard me do this once or twice before, and I'm hoping you're getting closer and closer to the right answers each time we do it. So really, this is just a simple exercise. Although am I an anti-Semite sounds a little bit stark, it's not quite that straightforward, because what it really does is it just possibly sets you thinking about the attitudes that you may have. You mentioned that you meant to be doing something on unconscious bias, and maybe it fits in with that. Just views that you may have picked up without even necessarily thinking about them, and therefore, based on those views, what you think of Jews. So I'm going to read out a series of statements, and all I ask you to do is, in your own mind, is just think about how much you agree with those statements or disagree with them, and you'll see. We're just talking about Jews. My aim here tonight is to try not to create any more anti-Semites, but I'm not always successful. But we'll give it a go. So anyway, so here are the questions. Here are the statements, or rather, and you just have a think about them, and then we'll open the conversation. So the first statement is: Jews are more loyal to Israel than to the countries they live in. Jews are more loyal to Israel than to the countries that they live in. Jews have too much power in international financial markets. Jews have too much power in international financial markets. Jews have too much control over global affairs. Jews think they are better than other people. Jews have too much control over global media. Jews are responsible for most of the world's wars. Jews have too much power in the business world. Jews don't care what happens to anyone but their own kind. People hate Jews because of the ways Jews behave. Jews have too much control in politics, and particularly over the United States government. I think I agree with that one, actually. Jews still talk too much about what happened to them in the Holocaust. That's the final one. The Jews still talk too much about what happened to them in the Holocaust. So if you're being honest with yourself, there's no one else to discuss this with, unless you choose to. But by, I suppose, well, there's no official barometer of these things, but if you agree with more than 2 or 3 of those statements, the chances are that you're picking up anti-Semitic tropes from the world around you. And that's why I'm saying it doesn't make you an anti-Semite, but it does mean that the ideas, those thoughts, certainly can be anti-Semitic. And I think that the element of doubt in there is why it's not just any one of those statements that is anti-Semitic. It's a view of Jews as a whole, and either it could be political, it could be Israel, it could be media, it could be business. But once you start to put some of those together, you're building a picture of Jews, which is, first of all, not true, and secondly, is built on those ideas which underpin a lot of anti-Semitic thought. Gavin, you're muted. That's not going to help.
It was just because my laptop gets tired after a while and starts making noise. So just trying to not have the noise in the background. I think those questions, I think for me it's a good place to start, rather than looking at anti-Semitism or indeed racism as something out there. and something that other people are guilty of, and beginning with ourselves, and having those helpful statements to just consider. I mean, I wonder whether at this point anyone would like to sort of to reflect, to make any comments, ask any questions. I'm not especially expecting it at this point, but please feel free if you'd like to do so, or to any questions to clarify that you might like to ask Aaron.
Yeah. And please, I don't offend. So if it's on your mind, I'm more than happy to hear it, and I won't take it badly or wrongly, I promise.
I'm just going to vouch for that, Aaron. I've had you in a few lines then, and you've not once taken offence. Thank you so much.
I can see Jonathan's hand up. Jonathan, do you want to unmute yourself, please?
Yes, I think I started out thinking, excuse me, I'm only pausing because I want to use fewer words than we're going to come out if I just launched into it. I think what I hope is that I would catch myself if I found myself making any generalized statements of that sort, actually about any group, and that I hope that I would rely on my own experience before I made any of them. However, there's something that I can remember in a conversation in the library cafe once, Aaron, admitting to you, catching myself with a bit of anti-Semitism when I'd been in a queue on a tube station in London, and a Jewish man wearing a long black coat and a broad black hat walked to the front of the queue, and I caught myself thinking, oh, sense of entitlement. I mean, it may just have been that his eyesight was very poor and that he didn't see most of the queue. I've no idea why he went straight to the front of the queue, but I was quite shocked at discovering myself in that response. But I think what I want to say about the exercise as a whole is that I hope that I'm weaning myself off making generalizations about any group.
Thank you. Do you want to respond, Aaron? I see there's a couple of comments in the chat. Shall I add those? And I mean, certainly one of them, we're going to move on later to speak about Israel-Palestine. So I don't want to get too caught up with that immediately, as it would be helpful to give you a bit more context in our conversation. But Aaron, and everyone, I'll read out. So Andrew C has put, the only statement of Aaron's that I definitely agreed with was about Jewish influence in US politics, which is about political support for a right-wing, essentially secular, oh gosh, it's just moved, secular regime against the rights of the Palestinian people. Does this support of this statement tends towards anti-Semitism?
So, would you like to respond?
What do you want to respond?
So I can. I mean, I don't mind. I mean, I'm happy to talk about it briefly. Thank you, Andrew. As I said, agreeing with the statements in and of themselves isn't necessarily a problem. It may be different people react to these statements in different ways and feel challenged in different ways. And what I found also is that doing it over Zoom is different to doing it in a room with people. There's just a different chemistry that happens. And Jonathan, you mentioned that we had a coffee in the library and a chat, and I miss those days, and the opportunity to sit with you and with anyone that has questions and talk. I don't know enough about US politics, to be honest, to really have much of an opinion. I mean, the Jewish influence in US politics cuts both ways, for a start. I mean, just being Jewish doesn't make you right wing. In fact, many Jews are left wing, and as we've discovered in this country, many Jews have lost their political home, or had lost their political home with Labour under Jeremy Corbyn, and that left them very distressed. The current Biden administration is more Jewish than the Trump one was. Trump's daughter had converted to Judaism. Biden's, well, Kamala Harris's husband, as far as I know, is Jewish. Biden, I think, has Jewish children. I don't know. I don't know. As Gavin says, we'll talk about Israel-Palestine perhaps as a separate issue. But I do think that if you dig beneath the surface, you'll find that Jews are as comfortable and as prevalent on the right as they are on the left. And therefore, the implication in your statement that Jewish influence is a right-wing issue is probably about perception through the media or through other avenues that are open to you, and that's the view that comes across. And perhaps, again, you're not anti-Semitic, I'm sure, but perhaps, as Jonathan says, the point of it is that the generalization is the issue. You know, saying Jews are right-wing is wrong. It's factually wrong, and the perception of that is therefore something that you have to, to explore. Is it true that Jews are right-wing? I think you'll find the answer is no, not necessarily. So yeah, I think Jonathan's really framed it really well, talking about generalizations. That's the issue. That's what we're trying to get at. If you have a set of beliefs about a group of people, if that set of beliefs is not to do with the core identity of that group of people, then where does it come from? And does it follow that it must be true? These statements about Jews, do they have to be true because these people are Jewish? Or is it just something else that's coloring our perception? Over to you, Gavin.
Thank you. I noticed that a number of people have had their hands up, so perhaps if we just take a couple more comments and then we'll move on. Nikki Chater, I think you had your hand up. Do you want to speak, or could you unmute yourself?
Hello, thank you. No, that's okay, because I was going to ask about how we talk about Israel-Palestine without coming out as anti-Semitic.
Yes,
you're going to cover that.
Okay, right, and so I think we've
Graham has his hand up.
Graham.
Yes, thank you, Gavin. I was just wondering whether there's a difference here between the levels of racism, the levels at which racism operates, and what you tended to be talking about is personal views, when in fact a lot of those tropes are actually inherent within our culture, and so they operate at a different level, and we may personally not feel that they represent our viewpoint, but by participating in general cultural positions, we often can see those icons become a reality.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, let's take that point, and I think we'll move us on, because we're sort of, because I'd like to move on to a couple of case studies, which I think then will flesh things out a bit more. So thank you, Graham, and thank you to others who've shared now. So the first case study we're going to look at is a project called Young People in Conversation, in which we took a group of young people to Auschwitz-Birkenau in 2012. Aaron, should I say a few things about that just to give the picture of it? So, and I realised that I think that was when Aaron, you and I first met, was through that project, sort of 10 years ago, yes, as we were sort of preparing for the visit. And so the group was comprised of an ethnically and religiously diverse group of young people from Newcastle, as well as a number of faith leaders or representatives. So that included Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Sikh and Baha'i leaders or representatives. And to give you some context, I remember one of the questions very early on from a young girl from the West End of Newcastle, from sort of Iraqi background, began with a question. I'm not sure if it was you, Aaron, or whether it was David that she asked, Aaron's predecessor, which her question was, so why do we all hate the Jews? That's where we began. So it wasn't a group that was very nuanced at times, but actually, in some senses, that was better because we knew what we were dealing with. We were sort of engaging directly with people. So as a group, we travelled to Poland and visited Auschwitz and Birkenau. And I think there was something really important about travelling together and the friendships that began through that experience that have been sort of tested through time, and relationships have continued. But also the experience of going to somewhere horrific that is emotionally so challenging, that also brought us together as people from different backgrounds, religiously, ethnically, socially, and so on. So that sort of gives the sort of picture of what we were up to. Aaron, do you want to sort of enlarge on that at all?
Yeah, I mean, you've really encapsulated it very well. I came into the project roughly halfway through it, which is why you mentioned my predecessor, David. And yes, you're right. The question was to him right at the beginning. And we had these regular monthly meetings or so, didn't we? Most of them downstairs here in the synagogue.
Yeah.
And it was quite remarkable to bring a group of people that would otherwise have never seen the inside of a synagogue, much less spoken to Jews or possibly even people of other faiths. Alison, I see that you referenced that in your comments in the chat. So this was really a unique opportunity. That what was important for me, apart was seeing these young people go on, metaphorically as well as literally on this journey. I mean, even when I came in, with just, I think it was 4 months to go until the trip, there was still a lot of awkwardness and tension. We needed to have Tali Padan, who was an Israeli who had these mediating skills, and she was able to use icebreakers and other ways to bring the group into the present and somewhat able to sit down together and not feel very much on edge. So it was a long process, and it took a lot of shepherding, I think, along the way. But I think we did something remarkable, because by the end of the trip, there was such a sense of camaraderie and genuine friendship amongst the group, and respect. And yeah, if we hadn't gone, I mean, we could have sat around, in circles every month for another couple of years. I don't think we'd have achieved anything like the levels of breaking down those barriers that we were able to do. And of course, the stereotypes that some of the young people held about Jews and about people of other faiths were remarkable. I think, in fact, some of the stereotypes that some of the young people held about the leaders of their own faith that were involved were probably changed as well. So the value of the trip was enormous.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just noticing the chat. There's a comment about our hymns, and I'll come back to that later, because later on I'll speak a bit about how I feel we as Christians can respond to anti-Semitism, or what we need to be mindful of, really. Yeah, I mean, Aaron and I have both visited Auschwitz-Birkenau together and apart on a number of occasions. But I think there was something special about that particular visit. Yeah.
I think one of the things that was so special about it was that we were taking young people who had been brought up with, at the very least, soft Holocaust denial. Not necessarily that there wasn't a Holocaust, but it was minimized. It wasn't as terrible as it's made out to be, and the Jews weren't the only victims, or other ways of softening the blow, as it were, of what the Holocaust was. And so for them, it was a real journey of discovery. And in fact, I remember there was negotiation with parents to allow the young people to go because of the concerns that they would come back with ideas that would run counter to what their communities were preaching or supporting. So it was a brave journey for them, as well as being a journey of discovery.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was a great deal of work that went into those preparatory meetings that were really important. And the youth workers with whom we collaborated as well, who with their own backgrounds are sort of ways into communities that we wouldn't have had otherwise. So yeah, that was, we needed to work together, and we needed to listen and be sensitive to one another. Yeah, I've got a picture that I would like to share, if I can do so on my screen share. And then Aaron, do you want to talk us through it?
Sure. I don't know what this is, by the way.
Right, Corinne is telling me that the host has disabled participant screen sharing. Would you mind enabling it?
Just because it's you, lovely.
Thank you.
I will do that right now.
It's a lovely photo.
Hang on a second. There you go, Gavin. You should be able to do that now.
Right. Let's have a look. Right. There we go. Can everyone see that? If so, Aaron, do you want to talk us through the image?
Yeah, well, it's 4 handsome people. I think one of them's actually a girl at the back. Yep. 3 Muslim and 1 Jew. That would be me. We're in the car park at Auschwitz, and we just got back on the bus. So we're boarding the bus to go back to base camp or wherever we're going. And I think around the same time, the Imam, Raza, another good friend of ours, and I realized that it was time for prayers. And although they pray 5 times a day, we pray 3 times a day, but this one seemed to intersect. And so we all got off the bus to pray, and that's the picture of us praying together but apart, facing the same direction, because Mecca and Jerusalem are roughly in the same sort of area. And I think what particularly was special for me afterwards, when we got back on the bus, was that none of the 4 of us really thought there was anything remarkable about it. We were just, we had to pray, so we got up to pray. Yeah. And that really is the best sort of interfaith, isn't it? Where it's just each of us doing what we have to do and just sort of fitting in with those around us, and with the respect. I mean, there's this little distance there, but it was, for us, it was just, time to pray, let's pray. And it was really special. But back on the bus, as I say, those that were watching thought it was a really, special moment. So it was a privilege to be part of that. And as I say, my friendship with Raza, which also Gavin, I met her around the same time I met you, and continues to this day, is something that I cherish and hold dear. And it was a good moment. It was it was nice. It was just people being people, getting on, and you can't overestimate the power of that. One thing I was just thinking, I don't know how long we're going to talk about this particular part of the segment of 4, but just one thing that I was thinking was that although going to Auschwitz-Birkenau was brought with it so much baggage and emotional support for each other and all the other things that we had to do, just the act of spending time with each other was valuable. And as I say, I think sitting around in a circle, or even in a constrained place like on Zoom or in a library, has a value, but getting out and going somewhere, anywhere, also has value. And so although this was Auschwitz-Birkenau, if we'd been going to some other site, either of commemoration or even a place where we could have fun, a theme park, that would have also had a binding effect, and I think that gets to the core of my belief, that most of the issues that we have to deal with can be dealt with not necessarily by addressing head-on the points that rub up against each other, but just by realizing that we're talking as human beings, as people to each other, and that, again, Jonathan summed it up in the first moments of this. Once we get past the generalizations and realize we're just talking about people, people that happen to be Jewish, people happen to be Muslim, people happen to be Christian. Apart from, of course, Gavin, you're Episcopalians who you think crazy, but we'll deal with that some other time. That's really the important part of this, and that's what I try and do, and that's what I tried to do on this trip, was not to relate to people as a rabbi, just to relate to people as a person. And I think to a large extent we were successful doing that. And I remember talking to the Muslim boys on the trip, towards the end of it, and they really, it's completely shattered their perceptions of what a Jew was or who a Jew was, and that was mission accomplished. Over to you.
Thank you, Aaron. And I'd like to say that with this image that it was both very ordinary and extraordinary at the same time. So simply 3 Muslims and a Jew who needed to say their prayers, and it happened very spontaneously. So very ordinary, but also I should say that the Christians are on the bus watching rather than praying too. But someone had to take the photo. But there's still, and its position as well. So you see the sign for the museum. The museum is Auschwitz. We're in the car park in the snow in January, as people of faith, we pray, and there are times when we need to pray. So that just happens, and I think, as Aaron says, and yes, the sort of questions are coming in now about Israel-Palestine, and we'll get to that in a moment. But I think starting with those general statements of the Jews this, the Jews that, actually, if we can move beyond that to my friend Aaron, who is Jewish. So we're talking about real people, just as others may talk about Christians, that we are individuals. We're real people too. So I'm going to stop sharing now. Super. But yes, as the questions are coming in around Israel-Palestine, let's move on to the next section. We'll talk about that, and then I'll sort of bring our bit to a close by as I've mentioned, looking at how we can respond as Christians to anti-Semitism. So, Aaron, do you want to move us on to pathways, or shall I give the scene setting again? What do you want to do?
Oh, you're very good at it.
I knew you'd say that. It's not true at all. So the next part is quite difficult, really. And I'm going to be honest, we're going to talk about some tough experiences, and we will share in a spirit of openness, and I hope you'll receive it in a similar spirit. So quite some years ago now, a conference was held in Gateshead on a Saturday, focusing on the contemporary Israeli-Palestinian conflict from a one-sided perspective. It was organised by the churches and supported by a number of church leaders. I do want to make clear that it was in Gateshead, which has an internationally recognised ultra-Orthodox Haredi community, and it was held on a Saturday on Shabbat, on the Sabbath. And so members of the community that live in the place in which the conference was held were not able to attend. And the conference, I think, was coming from a particular place, and that's not to say that people can't have a variety of opinions on the contemporary conflict, but if you're holding it in Gateshead on a Saturday and you're not enabling other voices, then I think there's a question mark at least there. And friends in the Jewish communities in Newcastle, and I was based in Newcastle at the time, asked, what's going on here? What is what is this? And friends were incredibly upset and angry. It led to particular tensions between Christians and Jews in Newcastle. It was a tough time. It was a difficult time where I think both felt attacked and that they weren't being heard. And so it put a great strain on our relationships. Now, I'll pause there and I'll move on to the positive at the moment, but I'm aware that I'm giving a side as well. So Aaron, do you want to add to that or disagree with that?
I'll just say that I remember the moment that I saw the leaflet, and although there was, an organisation called Sabeel were prominent on it. They have a replacement theology which is essentially anti-Semitic. But for me personally, when I first saw it, the hardest part of that leaflet was at the top of one of the pages, not in particularly large writing, but where it said Northeast Churches Together, NECT, were the sponsors of this conference. And at that moment, I just remember feeling it's us against everyone. And that was a really hard thing to take on board. Us being the Jewish community. Northeast Churches Together to me was just this, and it is an umbrella organization. And it just seemed like this was going to be, the David v. Goliath in a sense. It was just a really hard moment. And although you talk about the difficulties, I have to point out that on a personal level, I had and have very good relationships with most of the people that were heading those churches. And we never fell out. I know that there were voices in the community that were more strident than mine, and did end up causing more bitterness, or that more bitterness arose from those confrontations. But these were people that I wouldn't say they were necessarily friends, but they were people that I was very respectful towards and that seemed respectful towards me, and we had very cordial relationships. And it all just seemed to have gone out the window with that Northeast Churches Together rubric, the name there that's saying we're all behind this conference, we support this organization and their anti-Semitic theology. It was really crushing. That was early August, I think, or late July, and it was. I remember the moment well. It wasn't good. It wasn't a good moment. Sorry, carry on.
It was really tough, and I, as a priest in the diocese, I saw church leaders who were intransigent, who weren't willing to listen to Jewish friends, and it was a really tough time. So, but also I would say that from that it led to the deepest dialogue I feel I've engaged in. I remember sitting in a room in Church House in Percy, Maine, Christians and Jews together, and really listening. And rather than wanting to shout or say, this is what I think, saying, okay, I'm going to listen and I'm really going to try and understand where you're coming from here. And it was exhausting doing that. But that commitment to really listening was so important. And we looked at one or two responses. What can we do? and one of them we didn't sort of get terribly far with. Another, which we'll move on to talk about now, we have gone from strength to strength. So we said, what can we do? Well, Aaron and I and others agreed that what we could do was take Christians and Jews to the Holy Land together, to visit places of conflict, places where it kicks off and has done a bit when we've been there, and to listen to a range of different views. And I mean, one of the most useful things I think from I think we've had 3 visits now, we have more hopefully post-COVID coming, but one of the most helpful things that was said early on was a Christian minister who said, I knew it was complicated, I now know it's even more complicated than I thought. And that was really helpful, because just I think it's sort of coming up in the chat that people have their views. That's great, but I would invite you to recognise it's probably more complicated than you're asserting. And I guess one of we were clear with our objectives that we were not seeking to sort out the Middle East. That's not our job. We're not paid that much, but we can improve our relationships in the northeast of England. So that's been our focus. I'm going to pause there, and I want to leave some time to, and I see the chat pinging away, to move on to practical actions for Christians today. But let's stop there, and some of those who have views that they want to share, then I invite you to do so. So if you'd like to raise your hand rather than me trying to work through the chat now, then you can certainly unmute yourself.
Gavin, before you do go to a different speaker, I think Joanne Thorns should be allowed to come in and just say what she said based on the story that's just been told.
Joanne, yes, please.
Sorry, yeah. I just when you were saying that, I just wanted to clarify that Northeast Christian Churches Together doesn't exist anymore as such. And Northeast Churches Acting Together operates under very different things and different ways of being. And I would hope that before holding anything like that in the future, I would have checked that out, not only with Gavin, but with various other people to check we weren't doing anything inappropriate.
Thank you. I think we've learned.
I think we've learned some lessons, hopefully.
Thank you, John. As I say, I wasn't aiming at any particular organisation. I just remember that moment when I saw that banner, that headline, and it just seemed like it was everyone, supporting this. And
Aaron, you're not someone to hold a grudge. I just wanted to make sure that Joanne had the right to justify the difference between the 2 organisations.
Yes, the two are very closely named, and I just wanted to point out the difference.
Yeah, thank you. So any other comments that people would like to make? Hold up your hand and I will.
I think Andrew's made some interesting points. I don't know if he wants to maybe share them.
Yes, please, Andrew. You might need to unmute yourself.
Well, I just have done.
Good.
No, I sent something to the chat about the United States and left and right. Maybe for later, but I would love to hear views of religious views, and I would guess there's probably quite a range of views from religious Jews about the Palestinian question, and sounds as if that was specifically what was missing from that conference.
Yeah, so first of all, yes, of course, there's a range of views. There is no one religious view, and from one extreme to the other, there are Jews religious Jews who embrace the vision of Iran, and wish to see the destruction of Israel. And then you have Jews who are absolutely set in the, perhaps in a more messianic camp, that believe that the whole land ought to be Jewish and there ought to be a temple. And then you have most Jews who fall somewhere between those two. Being Jewish doesn't give you a political view. Being Jewish doesn't give you even necessarily a religious view. There's so many to choose from. In terms of the Palestinian situation, it's not a view of Israel and a view of Palestine. I think for many people within the community, they try and hold both. So they would see the primacy, as it were, of Israel, in the sense that this is a Jewish state and needs to be preserved as such. And they would also recognize that there are people called Palestinians living there who also need to be recognized in their own way and given a right to live their lives and have their self-determination, whatever else. So we're not going to get into the politics. I think the one thing I would add to that is that if we use something like the somewhat controversial IRA definition of anti-Semitism as a framework for how to have these discussions, then you don't need to worry about straying into anti-Semitic opinion. And that's the way I hope that the IRA definition is used, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism, which tells you what you can and can't say, not the opinions you can and can't hold, but how to express those opinions. So there are very few opinions that are outside the pale. And that would be just dismissed outright as anti-Semitism. Replacement theology is one. Nowadays, it's recognized that advocating for a one-state solution is essentially a call for the destruction of a Jewish state, and therefore, therefore it's vehemently anti-Zionist and, in its way, therefore anti-Semitic. But most opinions, most views can be held. It's just a question of finding an appropriate way to express them and to debate them. We've had all sorts of opinions expressed on our Pathways trips. In fact, Gavin, I think one of the most meaningful experiences of those trips was yours, when you wanted to walk up to Temple Mount. And you were refused entry because you were with a Jew. And that might have been the only time in your life that you've been not allowed to go somewhere because your mate's Jewish. But that sort of experience, is in Israel. You're being told you can't go somewhere, not because you're Jewish, but because the bloke that you're standing next to is Jewish, and therefore we were refused entry to a certain part of Temple Mount. So those experiences are very powerful. Of course, we are limited. We're limited because we could only go places that we would all go. So, for example, I can't go into Gaza. I can't go into certain places in the West Bank. So there are limitations. What we try and do is we try and bring people from those places as much, not from Gaza. That's just not possible. But people that work in, deep in the West Bank and in Palestinian-controlled territories that can come into Israel and meet us. So we've done that. And of course, not forgetting there's other minorities in Israel, and some of them have big grievances, not least of which are the Bedouin. In fact, another person that we've actually had in Newcastle, Ishmael Kaldi, who is shortly to be appointed as an ambassador to some African countries. He's actually speaking to our community on Monday night. About the experiences of minorities in Israel. So criticizing Israel is something which comes very naturally to all Jews, whether from the right or the left. We're all very critical. And I would say that I would hope, certainly, that the Jews that I'm talking to also have a sympathy for the Palestinian positions. It's just a question of trying to work out a way through those, navigating a position that makes sense for everyone. Should we look at the chat?
Well, let me just ask a quick question, because I'm aware that we should keep to our time and recognise this. I think, as was said earlier, about opening conversations, starting conversations, not this is it. So just a very quick question, Aaron, because I know you can answer it quickly. Is supporting Palestinians anti-Semitic?
No.
There you go. Thank you.
Just let me say, Alison points out they weren't on Temple Mount with the Linz von Ordnance and Bermudas. This was not quite that situation. This was a road up to Temple Mount. It was a security block that we weren't allowed past, that otherwise we would have been allowed, or Gavin would have been allowed past if it wasn't for my presence. So it's not, I don't want you to think I'm exaggerating or, you know, trying to find, you know, tease out stories that weren't there. This was genuinely the case. That's,
yeah. Super. And so I'm aware that you know, that we've hopefully learned recently, if we didn't know it already, that the responsibility isn't for black people to tell white people how not to be racist. Similarly, it's not for Jews to tell Christians how not to be anti-Semitic. So I'm going to share a few sort of concluding thoughts briefly. From my own experience as a Christian who works with Jews. So, and I'm going to highlight a few areas of the church's life where I need to be more careful, where we need to be better, or where a change of mindset is needed. So hymns were mentioned in the chat, I think, earlier. Our liturgy is one place where we need to be careful. The Book of Common Prayer is still the liturgy of the Church of England, although we tend to use Common Worship. Do have a read of the third collect for Good Friday from the Book of Common Prayer, which, well, I'll just read a bit of it. Have mercy upon all Jews, Turks, infidels and heretics, and take from them all ignorance, hardness of heart and contempt of thy word. That's there in our liturgy, whether we use it today or not. So our liturgy, our hymnody as well, looking at our hymns, and I guess many people, you know, if it's got a good tune, that's great, but we are becoming more aware of elements of racism within our hymns. Let's be aware of anti-Semitism within them as well. Now, our preaching and teaching, this is something that I feel quite strongly about, because I have sat in churches and listened to sermons where the preacher has said, Jews believe X or Jews do Y. And I've been sat there thinking, do they? Do they? And listening to a sermon thinking, is this anti-Semitic or is it just ignorant? And I have had that on multiple occasions. I think it's really important for us as preachers to recognise that those statements are often based on our biblical understanding or our interpretation of particular biblical ideas or passages. But it's important to remember that Jews exist today. So we're not talking about people 2,000 years ago, we're talking about people who are alive, who live in our communities with us, who are our friends, who we work with, who are around today. So get to know your local Jewish community. Join the Northeast branch of the Council of Christians and Jews. Aaron, you can tell Deanna I've done the plug for CCJ. And join other interfaith groups as well. Buy, for example, this book, the Jewish Annotated New Testament. So preachers, when you're preparing your sermon and you're reading biblical commentaries, refer to that book as well. I can't keep on the chat and talk at the same time. I'm not very good at multitasking, but I saw reference to the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And Amy Jill Levine, one of the authors of that book, is a great defender of the Pharisees and say actually they're not as they are portrayed in the New Testament. So be aware of your preaching, please. The theology, again, I'm not going to go into that in any depth, but Aaron has referred to replacement theology or supersessionism, and so very briefly, that's the view that the new covenant through Christ supersedes the old covenant with the Jews. Either that the church has replaced the Jews as the true Israel, as the true Israelites, or that the new covenant has replaced the Mosaic covenant. If this were the case, why do we have the Old Testament in our Bibles or the Hebrew Scriptures? So this, sorry, it's pinging. I think that's people trying to get in. So be careful with your theology that there's far more nuance that's there. But supersessionism is alive and well in the Church of England today, sadly. And then finally, and I'll sort of end at this point, the discussions about Israel-Palestine, don't be put off having them, but don't fall into the trap of thinking that it's black and white, that it's simple. It's not. And don't assume that all Jews have the same opinion. I think Aaron has made that abundantly clear. That is not the case. Similarly, with all Palestinians having the same opinion, or different communities within those groupings, and come with us on a Pathways visit to the Holy Land. See the places for yourself. Go with Jewish friends and hear a variety of opinions, a variety of voices. I'm aware that I've overrun a bit. Aaron, do you want to?
Yeah, only just to say thank you very much to everyone. I think I hope it's been of use to you. I always enjoy gathering away to people. And if anyone would like my contact details, then please just get in touch with any of the organisers. I'm very happy to have my phone number or email and get in touch. And this is hopefully the beginning of a conversation, not the end. And as always, Gavin, thank you to you. It's always nice spending time with you.
Thank you. It's always good to have a chat, and a benefit that others are with us. I'll hand over now to Pouya.
Thank you, Aaron and Gavin. Very interesting stuff, and thank you so much for sharing. By no means I am not anywhere near to be expert about the stuff that Gavin and Aaron just shared, but the purpose of me tonight is just basically to share my own experiences of basically racism. And I'm married to a German, and basically the two of us being together with our backgrounds. I'm originally Iranian, so I was born, what Aaron earlier was just talking about, destruction of the state of Israel. That's the Iranian. And I can totally understand that. As part of what I'm going through tonight, I will share some of the stories about my upbringing and how I grew up in that kind of context. But because I came to this country about 12, 13 years ago, I soon learned it doesn't take that long, especially for you guys, for the British culture to make you guilty. So I would like to just clarify the purpose of some of the stuff that I say is not to make you guilty. So I want to clarify this, because by being guilty, actually nothing is going to change. We don't even start to have that kind of conversations together. It is actually to just share that this is my experience, with the hope that actually we are convinced to just engage with some of the experiences of people from a different race and background, to come across to you as something that maybe you could support in the future, especially those that to some extent they've been hurt by some of the stuff that has happened. I had a chat with Remy a couple of weeks ago. He said something that really stuck with me, so I want to bring it up. And he just said, it is about confronting ourselves at the altar when we just think about racism. And I totally agree with that comment, because it's not just always about other people, what they said, what they've done. It's about you and I. So to start with, I'm just going to name a few things, and I'm just giving you a moment to just think about your own experience, because as soon as we hear about racism, the first thing we say is like, I'm not a racist. I don't say this stuff. I don't do it. And for some of us that actually we are Anglicans, we just say it in our confession, literally, possibly every week, that Almighty God, our Heavenly Father, we have sinned against you. right? And against our neighbor in thought, word, and deed, through negligence, through weakness, through our own deliberate fault. So we are confronting ourselves with the stuff that is going here, the stuff that we say, and also the stuff that we sometimes through our negligence, ignorance, and sometimes deliberately we just say. So if you just think of the whole of the impacts of racism in our personal life, there are different aspects that sometimes we need to reflect on. The first one is family. Just think of the stuff that your parents have taught you, the stuff that your siblings, the jokes that we have about certain people, some of the stuff that we said, and that has become something that we relate to it as funny stuff. But when you just think about it twice, you just think, oh my goodness, actually some of it is quite racist. The second is the societal impacts. We grew in the society in some part of the world that has its own culture and some of the stuff in our upbringing. What are those impacts in your personal life? The third one is the education. We have gone to the school with other students. What has been our sort of experience with the education? Media impacts. At the moment, I'm just watching Death in Paradise. I don't know if you have watched it. It's a BBC production, but some of the stuff that the inspector says is quite really racist towards French people. And some of the folks in that island are very quite racist sometimes towards him being British. And yet that is something that you just see in the media, even back then, that some of the stuff that was quite normal, sense of humor, humorous, nowadays it would be criticized badly throughout media. So that's something else we need to just have in mind. And also Aaron and Gavin tried to just tell us quite a lot about the different aspects of religion, but the religious impacts, somehow our church background, some of the stuff that we've been taught in Sunday school throughout our churches, whether we are high, low, in the middle, from Anglo-Catholic background or evangelical, some of the stuff that we've been taught that has brought this kind of maybe really subtle sort of division and racist edge to it, but maybe it has impacted us. I'm really glad, I think it was Jonathan earlier, he just said it, but I had it down in my notes and I just thought it is good to just say it. If you really think that we are not one of those people, right? We don't say this stuff that other people may say, you know, it's always somebody else, it's not me. Just think of, again, somebody jumping on the queue. People of a different background, different accent, different color. Or I think the best emoji sometimes is when we are driving, right? When we are driving, somebody with the different sort of even plate from different country, different color, just basically doesn't really, you know, drive carefully. And what comes to our mind? The first thing we think of those people. Is it something that we need to just look? Because I totally believe, I'm personally convinced that racism is the racial issues is a human issues, despite where we were born, despite what we have done, our educations, as I said, the societal impacts, media impacts, is something that is within us. And this is where we have to confront it. For some of us, more than the others. But looking at the different aspects of it, human nature is a selfish nature. And therefore, in our selfish approaches to life with other people, sometimes we say, do, or think of others in a way that is not appropriate. Second, the human nature is a fearful nature. So out of fear and concerns that we have with people, sometimes we deal with them in a way that possibly could be come across in that kind of a category of racism. Gavin just mentioned it. Human nature is an ignorant nature. Despite we have hundreds of books, with whom we mingle, what we do, all kinds of this stuff. But there are part of us, our knowledge, our understanding, that it remains ignorant. And when we are dealing with people that possibly they are very different than us, that ignorance could really play a main part. And it is very interconnected, as I just said, with that fear that we have with something that is different. And also, lastly, I want to just say human nature is an assumptuous nature. We assume things about each other. We don't know each other. We see it. You see me, I see you. The first thing we just see, we look into each other's eyes, you know, whatever, and then our brain just starts to just assume things about the person, whether you like the person, you don't like the person. To give you two examples about my own experience, once I was doing a mission studies, and one of our tutors just came in. They said, well, your tutor is coming in a minute. And she came, one of her eyes were blind, and half of her body was paralyzed. And we were so excited that somebody's coming to just tell us about mission. So straight away, I assume, oh no, what's going to be about? And straight away, she earned her respect, because she just said that actually she was shot and tortured by Taliban with her missionary works in Afghanistan. Straight away, she addressed my assumption about what I could see in her. Oh no. And I just thought, oh my goodness, why did I think that a few seconds ago? So there are assumptions that we have about each other that sometimes it needs to be addressed. The second thing is, some of you may read the book, David Garrison just wrote a book, Wind in the House of Islam. So this guy had the tour around the country. So I was part of the organization. We went to one of his tours, and it was just by invitation, people could come to that meeting. And while I'm parking the car with my wife to go in, I just saw a guy in completely Muslim, really, I mean, long beard. You could just see this guy is Muslim, and he's coming in. And I'm just thinking, oh no, who invited this chap? You know, we are going to just talk about the impacts of Christ's message on Muslim community. Why is he doing it? And he's just coming in, and he goes in. Some people give him a hug, and I just think, this is so strange. What is happening here? So he's coming in, and he goes right in front, and he just sits in where the other speakers were just sitting and having a conversation. So I soon learned he was one of the speakers. So he was one of the hidden believers, or the secret believers in Leeds, that God just told him, don't change anything about you. And out of what he shared, tens of people from his mosque had the encounter with Christ or with the Holy Spirit through his life and the testimony. So he remained with the appearances that I could see, but he was one of the disciples of Christ. So this is something, again, that it brings into the whole mix, that we need to be careful not to assume things, especially when it comes about the racial injustice. So I bring you, for the next couple of minutes, I'm just going to tell you a few stories about myself, the stuff has been done to me, or I've seen it has been done to other people, because we've learned, I'm sure that we all know that racism and the whole issue of racial justice is not just about colors, it's not about people's skin colors. It sometimes is more than that. It's about people's language, it's about accent, it's about religion or race. So that's why it is extremely important that we need to listen to the people's individual stories. I grew in Iran. I grew up in a country that was very racist and very hostile towards Jews, Baha'is, and I just grew up throughout my school days. Since the day one that I went to school, that I remember, we just start to say down with Israel and down with US before we started our classes. So that was just in the fabric of the school system. So that was what we do before we go. So we start to just basically cast out our vision that we want Israel to be destroyed. we hate Israel, and we hate America. And this is the gift of what happened since 1979 with the Iranian Islamic Revolution, that was the gift that it was given to all of us. And also we had about 4 million at the time Afghan refugees in Iran as one of the neighboring countries. So when we want to just humiliate each other, we just say, you are an Afghan, means you're worth nothing. So I just grew up just saying how much people were really racist towards us, and that was a normal thing. I'm, you know, hugely, you know, it's a general, possibly stuff that I'm just telling you. Obviously, there are some people that they weren't in that category, but that was my experience from back then. So when I came to this country, I went to a Bible college straight away, and there was a couple that were very supportive of, you know, the college and everything else. But she just told me once, just, you know, if I were sat on the plane next to you, the first thing will come to my mind, when are you going to blow up the plane? And this is what she just told me in a shock. I was like, oh my word, why even did you tell me that? She was a lovely, I mean, as I said, Christian lady. And then the whole of my story and journey carried on. I landed about 7-8 years ago in the Northeast. So I was playing football in the on a Saturday league, and quite a few times, actually, into your possibly surprise, when I just came to Sunderland to play football, I was punched in the face twice, and I was just verbally abused, and they just called me a nigger, because I was the only non-white member of the team. And it didn't help when I scored a couple of goals, of course, but that was what I got in the back of that. But going forward, I will tell you why I'm telling you all of these stories. My parents, they live in Turkey, and I just, prior to the whole COVID thing, I used to just go and visit. And every time I came back with the rise of ISIS, I was stopped at the airport for questioning. Where did I go? What have I done? And all kinds of those stuff. So anyway, we just basically landed at Darlington Airport. Possibly some of you have used it. It's a very small airport. And it was just 2 officers there. One of them I thought was an intern guy, because he was looking over to the immigration officer. So my wife went to just use the facilities, and I was just waiting. And I just felt somebody's tapping on my shoulder. I just looked around and I saw, it's that guy that I saw earlier. He just said, sorry, I have a couple of questions. I heard you were coming back from Turkey. I said, yeah, that's right. And he just said, I'm intelligent, one of the intelligence officers here, and I need to just ask you a few questions. I said, oh dear, just go ahead. So he just asked about, I don't know, 5-10 minutes questions after questions, where you have been and what you've done and so on and so forth. And then all of a sudden my wife just came around, you know, a white German, blue eyes. And he started apologizing to my wife that he was just questioning me. And that really struck me as something that, why are you apologizing to my wife? Why you stop me? Although we are one unit, obviously she had to just wait for me. And it was quite funny because, you know, towards the end, it just, actually, what are you doing? I was an ordinand at the time. And I said, well, I'm into training for ordination in the Church of England. He said, seriously? Like with that kind of, you know, being really surprised. I said, yeah, seriously. And he just said, all right, is there anything you want to report? So from a baddies, all of a sudden I was a goodie member because of my affiliation with an institution that he could relate to as something that it was non-threatening. And I just thought, I really hope that this is true, that none of my colleagues in the Church of England would really do anything with that kind of stuff. But by just assuming that because I'm in training with that, I'm not a threat, it's just possibly a wrong assumption again. But you can just see it all across. And so Yeah, I've learned soon enough. Every time that I'm just coming back, I now cut 5 or 10 minutes. I'm ordained in the Church of England, so they don't ask me questions, so I can come home rather straightforward. But I just say all of this stuff for the next 2 to 3 minutes. I want to bring it into the church context, because that's very important, that we hear some of those stories that has happened. I went to Bermuda twice. Don't judge me. Somebody has to go there. It was the word's Lord and the Lord's works. I just landed there. So as second time when I went there, I was a chaplain for a few months to the Bishop of Bermuda, because there was a vacancy there. And it is one of the places that if you really want to do any kind of case studies, is a great place, because there is a history. There are British territory, but there are a lot of racism because of the colony back then that still carries on to our days. So it's just massive. So when I went there, because I'm neither black nor white, I could really fit in both camps. So when the whites were talking to me, they were talking about them. When I was talking to the black, they were talking about them. So I've soon learned. So in those communities, you need a peacemaker. And this is why I suppose Gavin was just telling us earlier that the whole interfaith goal and the purpose is about being the peacemakers between the people of different race. So I've been in different churches, working with different churches, and sometimes when I am with people like part of the ministry or something else, people say, "Oh, you are quite all right, but other people like you." And all of these bots divide and put a barrier between something that it makes me really thinking. That it is true that I really immersed myself in British culture and everything else, but it is about my identity, because 20 plus of my years has been in somewhere that it wasn't in this country. You're sometimes assuming that you are quite all right, but your fellow citizens, ... sometimes doesn't really help. And as I said earlier, my wife is German. So a couple of weeks ago, I was talking to a lady from our church, and all of a sudden she just said, well, your wife being a German, she keeps herself to herself. And I was just thinking, well, she's an introvert. Just because she's a German doesn't mean that she's keeping herself to herself. So sometimes, again, just looking at the fabric of our communities, all of those stuff that people think is actually quite normal to say this stuff. It hurts. And sometimes, especially when it is about somebody that you love, part of your family members, this stuff can come across really, really wrong. In one of the churches that I worked in Wakefield, somebody actually told me in my face, "I really like you, but I don't want to meet your wife because she's German." And she had a lot of problems because of obviously the Remembrance Sunday. She didn't want to face my wife because she was German. But when you just hear the story from my wife herself, it's very interesting. I don't know if Aaron is here, but she just says, as a very young German, I've really soon learned that how much we were really hammered with that guilt of the past, the history, that at some point I felt I'm so responsible for what happened in the past, to the place that she just sat with her grandparents and looked them into the eyes and just said, "Tell me, did you have to do anything with Nazis?" And she always say that when she went to her sort of mission course, there was a guy from Israel. He just said, "For 2 weeks I was running away because I really felt that he doesn't like me and he doesn't want to face me. But they are one of the best mates ever now, because they could come and just talk about the stuff that they had." I will finish in 1 minute. But when I went to Cranmore, I was playing for St. John's College. And in one of the occasions, there was a referee that he was very racist. He just made a couple of comments directly towards me. And he just once, I don't remember, there was a foul or something. I said, "Oh, come on, ref." He just said, don't come on ref me. You can say something like that, being an idiot wherever you come from, but you can't really do that in England. Although other people, I mean, other teammates, they were just saying the same stuff, even worse. But he didn't react, but he just said, and I just confronted him. I said, what you said is racist, and I'm going to just report you, actually. And he started apologizing, because I was sure he wasn't really sorry. He was just afraid of what I confronted him. But what really, I think it was much more painful at the time for me, was none of my teammates said anything. And this is something that I want to leave with you. Sometimes we just hear other people say stuff and they think it's absolutely normal, it's okay. And sometimes people feel uncomfortable and they can't really say something straight away. I do understand that. But we need to be aware of one thing, that I'll leave you with one verse from the word of Jesus himself, that he says in Matthew 7:12. So whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them. For this is the law and the prophets. And this is it. I think that concludes the whole thing that I wanted to bring into your attention. Other people's experiences, sometimes that silence of others around them can hurt actually much more than what other people treat them. So we need to remember those emotions, those words impacts the individuals. And when it comes to the racism, we need to realize and remember that if we don't like something being really pointed at us or being said to us, possibly it is quite true about other people too. Thank you for listening, and hand over if there is any questions, or I think Corenza is going to just let me know if there is any questions has popped up, or if there is anything you want to address or ask.
Thank you, Pouya. I think at this point, because of the time constraints and the power of the story that you've given us, we actually don't have time for questions. But what we will do is we will allow people to let the words that Aaron and Gavin have shared and the experience that you have so powerfully shared rest and sink in over the next week. And we are all open for email communication or feedback if you would like us to have that. Pouya, I don't want you to feel out on a limb as if you've had no response from anybody in the room. So if it helps, I would
that's all.
like to let you know that was an incredibly powerful piece of testimony. Thank you so much for sharing that. That made you, thank you. May I pass over now to Remy, who's going to share an appropriate prayer for this time and a break from our usual procedure of using the cathedral one. Pouya, thank you so much. If you want to thank Pouya, everybody, do put it into the chat.
Can I just say a huge thank you, and trying to stick to time, to Gavin and also to Rabbi Aaron. Thank you so much for what you've offered, and also Pouya. And as we go home, and Corenza rightly said, why don't we take the time and just hold what has been offered to us? There's been so much, especially around the different perceptions people hold. And I want to leave you with one story I had in hospital where I work. A gentleman came in to see his wife who was ill. And the first thing he said to me for the first time was, I don't agree with the Bob Geldof appeal. I have no idea where that came from, but just some of the assumptions people have. Was he seeing me as representative of poverty or what? Till this day, I do not know. Before the prayer, I just want to read something, a quote that really came out as everyone spoke. And this is regards to the walls we build. What walls do we build around us? But this says, my first task in approaching another people is to take off my shoes. For the place that I am approaching is holy. Otherwise, I may find myself treading on another's dreams, their memories, their stories. More serious still, I might forget that God was there. And what's that telling me is sometimes we need to really take off our shoes. If we're not sure, enter into a dialogue. That's what we've done today. And hopefully, as Gavin said, this isn't the end. Let's keep it going. So I'll now share a prayer, which is a departure from what we've usually had, but this is an interfaith prayer. And so let us pray part of the prayer of St. Francis. Where there is hatred, let me so love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. Grant that I may seek not so much to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. Amen. And next week we will have Reverend Nikki Chater, an associate minister from St. John's Neville's Cross, who will be speaking together with Father John Chadwick from the Margaret Clitheroe Trust, and they will be focusing on the Gypsy and Traveller communities. So there's quite a lot in that. But we will also be having Reverend Tim Ferguson from the Communities Together in Durham, and he will be focusing on supporting parishes to engage in the diocesan response to poverty in our community. So that's next week. I'm just checking with Corenza, I've not missed anything. And if I haven't, thank you all for coming. Keep the conversation going and rest well. Bye for now. Okay.